Why don't we talk a little bit about the Islamic Republic of Iran today? You know, it's funny. There was a recent 60 Minutes episode just put up 4 days ago on their YouTube channel. I'm pretty sure this is recent. Yeah, the 2024 60 Minutes interview. They talked to Salman Rushdie, and we're only going to look at a few seconds of this. We're not going to react to the whole thing, but it's pretty relevant when talking about the history of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Salman Rushdie has been a marked man for nearly half his life. In 1989, Iran's leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, declared his novel, The Satanic Verses, blasphemous, an insult to Islam, and called for the Indian-born writer's assassination.
Yeah, so back in 1989, all the way back in 1989, Ayatollah Khomeini issued a fatwa on Salman Rushdie for publishing a novel that was offensive to Islamiyah.
Blow it out your ass.
Well, the attitude should have been, and it still should be, to tell goons like Ayatollah Khomeini, tough shit, this is America. Where we have freedom of speech, and we can say whatever we want, no matter how offensive it is to your belief, your religion.
Rushdie went into hiding with around-the-clock police protection for 10 years.
10 years, this guy needed police protection.
He eventually moved to the U.S. and thought he was safe. But in August 2022, as he was about to speak at a literary festival in Chautauqua, New York, Salman Rushdie was attacked by a Muslim man with a knife. Rushdie, who's now 76, lost his right eye and came close to die.
All right, so we got a fatwa by the supreme leader of Iran back in 1989 on this author who wrote a book that he found offensive, put a worldwide death threat on the guy, death order on the guy, hit on the guy. And then, you know, it took a few decades, but in 2022, someone tried to kill him, only got his eye. You know, all this talk about, the last week when Iran launched an attack on Israel, you know, a lot of people said, oh, well, you know, Iran wasn't trying to hurt nobody. They just wanted to, show force, flex their muscles to signal to the people in Iran that they mean business and that they're going to stand up to the Zionists. They didn't really mean to hurt anyone. They didn't hurt anyone. It only cost Israel north of $1 billion worth of artillery to intercept and shoot down the drones and the missiles so no one would get hurt. Yeah, Iran didn't mean to hurt nobody. Meanwhile, couldn't you say the same thing about Salman Rushdie? Someone tried to kill him. Someone tried to inflict damage, but they only took out an eye. I mean, does anybody really need both eyes? Yeah, he's still alive. Maybe he should take the win. Remember when President Joe Biden, he said to Iran, don't, when they were thinking about maybe launching an attack against Israel? Then they did, and then afterwards, Biden went to Israel, Bibi Netanyahu, and said, hey, take the win.
You absolutely suck!
What win? We lost $1 billion trying to intercept these attacks. You call that a win? Should we just tell Salman Rushdie to take the win and, hey, you're still alive? It's not just Salman Rushdie, though. We also have Masih Alinejad, a journalist who lives in the United States, who has had attempts on her life, both to assassinate her and kidnap her, based on the orders from the Islamic Republic in Iran. Here's a Wall Street Journal article she put up back in 2022. Iran tried to kill me on American soil. Well, they didn't. I guess one could say because her plotters, the people who tried to kidnap her, assassinate her, well, they were not successful. So maybe we should just take the win here for Masih Alinejad. And just, let the Islamic Republic just keep doing the horrible things they've been doing for the last 40 to 45 years. And they've been doing this stuff since the beginning. I guess you could just say it's Hezbollah. This is another thing that just drives me bonkers about this whole debate and discussion over the Islamic Republic. People act like groups like Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis Well, yeah, Iran funds them and supports them both financially, militarily, and spiritually, you could say, gives them moral support, encourages their shenanigans. But hey, it's not, attacks coming from mainland Iran anyway. It's not like it's their explicit military that's launching these. Well, it's just Hezbollah. It's just Hamas that's launching these attacks with the support of Iran. So can we really blame Iran for these attacks? Including one back in 1983 when they killed 241 military personnel, including 220 Marines, 18 sailors, and 3 soldiers in a terrorist bombing on the Marine Corps barracks in Beirut, Lebanon. But, it wasn't Iran. It was just, it's just one of their proxies, right? It was just Iranian proxies. This terrorist group that wanted to model themselves after the Islamic Republic and set up shop in Lebanon. Of course, there are also reports contradicting this claim. This is a popular claim amongst people in political commentary that, Iran wasn't trying to do much damage. They knew their hundreds of drones would get intercepted and shot down. They just wanted to flex their muscles without prompting a strong retaliation from Israel. They weren't really trying to hurt anyone. And I've talked about this before, bringing in tweets from Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who for over a decade now, I think, has been on social media calling for the destruction of Israel. And then he launches attacks. He sponsors and helps terrorist groups attack Israel. Then he launches attacks from mainland Iran, and everyone has this bizarre attitude like, he wasn't trying to hurt anyone.
You absolutely suck!
Well, we have this piece from Semaphore, from Jay Solomon, that says, Iran sought mass casualties in Israel's strike, U.S. officials say. So I guess it depends who you want to trust on that topic. But then there was this piece I came across the other day on the New Yorker. This is from May 18th of 2020, titled "The Twilight of the Iranian Revolution." This is a pretty long article. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I might jump around a bit. If you can see here, the audio version of this article is over an hour long, so it is a lot. But this was in 2020. And I think it's easy to forget because, as we know, a lot of stuff was going on in May of 2020. A lot of stuff was going on. So I think a piece like this, which in hindsight I think is pretty important. But a piece like this, I don't remember getting a lot of attention. I don't remember Iran getting a lot of attention during this time, aside from the whole squabble about killing General Soleimani. But yeah, this was written by Dexter Filkins on the New Yorker. And we'll just start here talking about when Ali Khamenei, not to be confused with Ruhollah Khomeini. Still don't know how to pronounce this guy's name, Khamenei. I've heard Khamenei. I'm going to say Khamenei, and if I get it wrong...
Well, excuse me, princess.
Anyway, the job gave Khamenei nearly absolute power, control of every branch of the government, command of the armed forces, and supervision of the judiciary. He proved to be a nimble and energetic autocrat, creating a parallel structure of each institution. This is how he kept everyone weak. Mehdi Kalaji, a former Shiite cleric in Iran who is now a fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, said, Khamenei also oversaw the country's largest concentrations of wealth, an array of institutional funds built on property seized from the Shah's elite, which came to be worth hundreds of billions of dollars. By this time, Khamenei and Mansour had 4 sons and 2 daughters. He moved the family into a house in central Tehran at the end of Palestine Street and walled it off from the public. The compound eventually grew to contain some 50 buildings, but Khamenei presented himself as an ascetic, dressing and eating simply. We do not have decorations in the usual sense, Mansour told Women's Magazine. Years ago, we freed ourselves from these things. And then the article mentions there are no pictures of her accompanying the interview. In 4 decades, she has never been seen in a photograph. In office, though, Khamenei moved fiercely against his enemies.
Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs!
He continued the regime's efforts to assassinate turncoat exiles, killing as many as 160 people worldwide. He killed 160 people. Again, I guess a lot of people will lead you to believe that Iran, they don't mean no harm. Their supreme leader has killed as much as 160 people worldwide. And again, this article was written before both Masih Alinejad had attempts on her life and before Salman Rushdie was attacked in 2022. But again, I guess the Islamic... Some people will argue that this brutal dictatorship... Oh, well, they're just defending themselves, Like Joshua P. Hill over on Elon Musk's website. I mean, this stuff got like 37,000 likes. Everyone who has ever said that Israel has a right to defend itself will, I'm sure, understand now that Iran has a right to defend itself after Israel bombed their embassy in Syria on April 1st.
Blow it out your ass.
Yeah, brutal dictatorships don't have rights, buddy, okay? This regime, you think, has a right to exist and defend themselves accordingly? He also helped preside over a murderous campaign against the MEK in which tens of thousands of members were executed. Khamenei, still convinced of the power of literature, made dissident writers and intellectuals a special target, banning books, closing newspapers, and imprisoning artists. Yeah, this is the governing structure of Iran that I guess has a right to defend itself.
Oh, you absolutely suck!
Poetry must be the vanguard of the caravan of the revolution, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei decreed. Over the years, reformers in and out of the government pushed to strengthen the rule of law, to allow the press greater freedom, and to curtail abuses by security forces. Time and again, Khamenei sabotaged any serious effort at liberalization.
Oh, you absolutely suck!
One of the most notable moments came in 1997 when a reformist candidate named Mohammad Khatami won the presidency in a landslide. As Khatami began to pursue his agenda, he encountered immediate resistance from inside the regime. Early in his term, the country was shaken by what became known as the chain murders. Chain murders? The killing of about 80 artists and dissident intellectuals, some of whom were mutilated, stabbed, or given lethal injections. I guess Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, he was just trying to defend himself, against artists and journalists and intellectuals who might undermine his bullshit-ass regime. The press, seizing on the new freedom that Khatami allowed, produced a series of exposés revealing that the murders had been carried out by operatives from the Ministry of Intelligence and Security, largely to terrorize Khatami's most articulate supporters. In response, the Iranian government closed the newspaper Salam, which had reported vigorously on the scandal. Protests began at Tehran University and quickly spread to colleges around the country. Khamenei had initially expressed revulsion at the murders, but when it became clear that the protests threatened his power, he turned on them. Security forces attacked a dormitory in Tehran University, killing 4 students, wounding 300, and arresting 400 more. Again, I guess he just had to defend himself, you guys. They don't really mean no harm. Khamenei was unmoved. Officials in the government, especially those in charge of public security, have been emphatically instructed to put down the corrupt and warring elements with insight and power, he said. Khatami, rendered virtually powerless, left office in 2005. I think Cenk Uygur has even alluded to this. Yeah. If any reporter says Iran started a broader war in the Middle East after they do retaliation strikes, they are absolute liars. I hope Iran does not retaliate, but Israel killed top Iranian general to provoke a wider war. Iranian generals who were known to help plot the October 7th attacks. I guess they're off limits according to Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks. If it starts, Netanyahu definitely started this war. See, but then I'm sure if you were to press Cenk on this, because I've seen him talk about it on the news before, oh, I don't like Iran. Oh, they're bad, but one, America's responsible for their power, and two, they didn't start this war. But like in times like this, you'd get the impression that Iran, they didn't want any trouble. They didn't want to hurt anybody. They were just trying to mind their own business and trying to keep their bullshit-ass theocracy within the borders of Iran. And then, big bad Israel just came and ruined everything. The poor Islamic Republic and their regime and their proxies and their efforts to plot terrorist attacks against Israel. They were just, sitting there peacefully in Syria, minding their own business. They weren't trying to hurt anyone after they had already hurt many people. This February 11th, 2020, the 41st anniversary of the revolution, a celebration was scheduled for downtown Tehran. I was at the restaurant in the city that morning when a waitress overheard me discussing plans to attend. "You're going?" she asked with a sneer. "They force people to be there. They blackmail them. They tell people that if they don't go, they will lose their jobs." Could you imagine if religious right-wing crazy Republicans in America did shit like this? Like, imagine Trump forcing people, blackmailing people, American citizens to go to his rallies. And if they don't, then he would seek to get them fired from their job. I can imagine a scenario where people on the left would rightfully lose their shit over that. A parade wound down Independence Boulevard for more than 2 miles. Along the way, placards proclaimed the victory of the revolution, and on every block hung portraits of Khomeini and Khamenei. The festivities seemed subdued, though, with small bands of marchers shepherding kids bundled against the cold. Some of the attendees dutifully cried, "Death to America and death to Israel." Again, guys, Islamic Republic means no harm. They're just chanting death to America and death to Israel and sponsoring terrorist groups and trying to get influence in other countries, in other regions beyond its borders. No big deal or anything. But when Hassan Rouhani, the country's president, came to the lectern in Freedom Square, there was barely a murmur. Most people carried on talking to one another. Rouhani promised that after the nuclear deal, most of our problems would be solved, a woman named Majide told me. "We decided to believe in a miracle. Look what happened." The sense of unreality did not stop at the parade. It accompanied me throughout my time in Iran. Even the circumstances of my arrival seemed cynically managed. I had been asking for years for permission to visit, only to be refused. Then in February, I got an unanticipated call from the Iranian interest section in Washington informing me that a visa had been approved. Some Iranians suggested that with international tensions high and the pandemic still in its early stages, the regime wanted to make a show of confidence. The visa, I was told, took effect immediately and would expire in 6 days. I ran for the airport. In Tehran, I was met by a pleasant, capable woman assigned by a government contractor to be my guide. The arrangement was designed to limit my contact to people approved by the government. It meant that the most revealing conversations were those I set up on my own with Iranians willing to risk meeting me after my minder had gone home for the evening. There were not many takers. Early in my visit, a Tehran lawyer who quietly supports women's rights initiatives offered to bring together activists from 4 separate organizations. They all refused. "I'm sorry," she said. "It's too dangerous." So right here, we get an impression that things in Iran for Iranians, for people who are not big fans of the regime, might be worse than we know, because a lot of these people have been silenced, have been intimidated into silence from the regime. You can't get people to talk. You can't get people to cover how brutal things are in Iran, because they know there might be dire consequences. The dissidents who agreed to meet me spoke of surviving waves of reform and repression. One night I met Bahman Ahmadi Amoué, a journalist and activist at a quiet restaurant where we shared a meal of kebab kubede, an Iranian specialty of minced lambs and spices. In the late 90s, when Khatami loosened constraints on the press, Amoué made the most of it. As a reporter for the newspaper called Hamshari, I'm going to get that right, Hamshari. Now it sounds like I'm saying I'm sorry, like Sean Connery. I'm sorry. Hamshari. Okay. This is off the cuff. I'm not Hamshari. I'm sorry. What do you guys think? Anyway, as a reporter for a newspaper called Hamshari, he wrote a series detailing how businessmen and senior government officials exploited the country's closed market to enrich themselves. One memorable article asked why nearly all of Iran's chadors, the head-to-toe cloaks worn by most women, were imported. The reason for this, he told me, is that powerful people in the government and out get rich from imports by blocking competition. Amoué's pieces were read and discussed all over Tehran, criticizing the government was an exhilarating novelty. Khatami was not thrilled, Amoué said, but he tolerated it. Amoué also covered the presidential election of 2009, which turned out to be the starkest test of Khamenei's commitment to popular rule. The election pitted a conservative incumbent, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, against a well-liked challenger, Mir Hussein Mousavi. Almost immediately after the polls closed, the authorities declared Ahmadinejad the winner. Yeah, who needs to count ballots or anything like that? Just declare it once the polls close. Seemingly too soon for the votes to have been counted, Iranians, especially those from the educated middle class, poured into the streets to protest that the outcome had been rigged. It was the beginning of what came to be called the Green Movement. Amoué and his wife, Gila Baniyaghoub, a journalist and a women's rights activist, joined the protest. The regime stole the election, he said. The people wanted their dignity, but as the demonstrations gained strength, the security forces swept in, arresting, beating, and killing protesters. Khamenei expressed regret for the violence, but also made it clear that the protesters were going too far.
Blow it out your ass.
They are not related to the candidates, he said. They are related to the vandals, to the rioters. On the 9th day of the protest, police came to Amoué's home and arrested him and Baniyaghoub for spreading anti-government propaganda. She was sentenced to a year in prison. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. For the first 3 months, he was confined to a closet-sized solitary cell where the lights were always on. White torture, he called it. I could not feel anything. I could not smell anything. I just wanted to talk to someone, but there was no one to talk to. I talked in my mind. Sometimes I lose my mind. By the time the demonstrations subsided, 10 months later, Mousavi was under arrest and some 4,000 demonstrators had been... 4,000 demonstrators. 4,000 demonstrators had been detained. At least 70 had been killed and many others raped and tortured in prison. But the election and the protests marked a turning point for the Islamic Republic. Months later, a leaked video of a meeting of Revolutionary Guard commanders spread to the internet. In the video, General Mohammed Ali Jafari, who was the leader of the Guard, said that the problem was not that a reformist was prevented from capturing the presidency, it was that the reformers had challenged the tenets of the revolution. It was a blow that weakened the fundamentalist pillars of the regime, he said. The protests had presented the ruling class with a new paradigm in which it could no longer count on popular support, he said. Anyone who refuses to understand these new conditions will not be successful. I mean, 4,000 demonstrators, 70 killed, others raped and tortured in prison. This is the regime that people think has a right to exist, has a right to rule tens of millions, I think 70 million people in Iran and defend itself. A movie was released in 2014. Since then, he's been bouncing from job to job, working as an editor and sometimes writing without a byline. His memoir, Life in Prison, was published last month in the United States. I asked if he felt safe talking to me and whether he wanted his name to be published. He did not hesitate. "It is my right," he said. After dinner, as Amoué and I drove to my hotel, we passed a darkened intersection where armed officers were pulling over cars and searching them. "It's all about maintaining fear," he said. Yeah, this is I know I've mentioned before recently. I recently binged The Handmaid's Tale seasons 1 through 5. I've read before that the villains for the novel were inspired by the Islamic Revolution in Iran and the regime in Iran. And that's something that happens frequently in the show, The Handmaid's Tale, is women are not allowed to drive. Women, I think select women, they're allowed out in public if they're like with their Marthas or with their partner, handmaid or whatever. But especially if you're driving at night, you need to be with one of the commanders and people stop your car and search and whatnot. I think this is also a thing in that Malala Yousafzai talked about in her book when talking about the Taliban, her life under the Taliban, and how they would frequently search cars and make sure there were they would like go house to house to like smash TVs and shit, and they'd pull over your car, and if you were caught having like a cassette tape from like a band from the West, you'd get in trouble. Khamenei did not always project menace. When he was first chosen to be the supreme leader, he was seen as weak, lacking the respect of his fellow clergymen. So he turned to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. To build support, he reached far into the ranks and appointed new colonels and brigadiers. Khamenei micromanages the whole system so everyone is loyal to him, Kalaji of the Washington Institute for Near East Policy said. He is hyperactive. He knows every low-ranking commander and even the names of their children. The IRCG, or the IRGC, the IRGC became the principal basis of Khamenei's power. In turn, he made it the country's preeminent security institution. During the Green Movement, the Guard and its plainclothes militia, known as the Basij, were instrumental in crushing dissent. According to Abbas Milani, the director of Iranian Studies program at Stanford and a former political prisoner in Iran, the uprising amounted to a political anointment. Clearly, the regime believed it was going to lose control and that the IRGC and the Basij saved the day, Milani said. The result is that the IRGC now has the upper hand. Khamenei knows that without the IRGC, he would be out of a job in 24 hours. So it sounds like Khamenei has done a pretty good job for himself, establishing his power and really integrating and getting the regime entrenched in many facets of society. And I know this is whataboutism. I was just watching a debate the other day, or parts of it, Dave Smith and Cenk Uygur debating Dennis Prager and... No, it wasn't that debate. No, it was another debate with Dave Smith. There are so many... I ranted about this the other day. There are so many debates about Israel. Like, every day there's, like, a new debate with, like, a fresh cast of characters. What's her name? Now I feel... Laban... Elika Laban, who's really blown up lately as this Iranian activist, Iranian criticizer.
What is your response to what you've heard so far?
Well, I'm really frustrated with the complete distortion of the narrative. Like, you're talking about these strikes in Syria, first of all, not being on an Iranian embassy. So let's just get our facts straight. It was on a military base that was next to the embassy. Why is the military base there? Yeah,
and look how many turds, like Cenk Uygur. Did he say embassy? No, but here we go. They bombed an Iranian embassy. This is true. But it was this guy, who's not a nobody. I mean, he has over 300,000 followers on Elon Musk's website. And as I already demonstrated, some of his brainlet takes get a lot of likes, get a lot of retweets. Maybe you could say that you're splitting hairs by calling it a compound and not an embassy. But I've seen people point out the pictures that, like, the embassy was next door. to the compound that got struck, and it looks like it's still intact. It's also been reported that it was behind the former Canadian embassy in Syria, which I don't think has been used since 2011, since the Syrian civil war started. The Canadians, I think, left the embassy. And people talk about, when people like frame it in these terms, they want you to make, they want you to make you think that like Syria is just, just this normal country that has all these embassies, and embassies are technically the property of the government who's in the embassies, and their purpose is for diplomacy and talking with governments in those countries and whatnot. That's not really the case with Syria. It's not exactly a normal country right now. It's still a country that's in a state of civil war by warring gangs. Anyway.
Why is the Islamic Republic making Syria vulnerable to these attacks? You want to talk about bombs on Syria? Guess who's...
Yeah, Elika Laban. I hope I'm saying that right. Daughter of Iran, attorney, activist, artist, 73,000 followers on Elon Musk's website. She's on Piers Morgan.
Doing that? Guess who's doing that? It's the Islamic Republic, by using other countries as a base, so it makes Syrian people vulnerable to that. So let's not just act like there's strikes on there for no reason. Second of all, you talk about civilians, but people were actually killed in that strike, which targeted senior IRGC leaders who were meeting with Hezbollah. Meeting with Hezbollah to do what exactly? Because let's just talk about what's been happening for the past 6 months, much less the past 4 decades, which is that we have seen October 7th, okay, which was an act of war. Let's be clear. Let's dispel this narrative that there's no evidence that the Islamic Republic supported that. It's been reported over and again. It was reported in the Wall Street Journal.
It was asserted in the Wall Street Journal.
Republic, no, let me finish. I'm not done. What do you think that the Islamic Republic is training, sponsoring, funding its proxies for? What do you think they are funding its proxies for in Israel, in Gaza, in Yemen, in Lebanon, and all of that? When there was a Terry scene happened, they shot the Islam in Yemen.
All right, I don't think they get to the whataboutism. She was also on Reason magazine the other day, and they were talking about this appearance and the whataboutism talking point. So, anyway, I guess I went off on a bit of a tangent there. But, yeah, I know this is whataboutism, but a lot of the people who are clutching pearls and talking as if the Islamic Republic has a right to defend itself, and often talk about they feign concern for the plight of civilians in places like Gaza, Syria, maybe even Iran. A lot of these people didn't really seem interested in supporting the Masa Amini protests. A lot of these same people don't really seem much interested whenever Iranians take to the streets to oppose their brutal regime. And you could say it's whataboutism. You could say it's whataboutism, and maybe in some cases it is, because it's meant to kind of deflect from the point at hand. But these people really claim to be to care about the plight of civilians. Why? I guess my question is, why don't they show nearly as much contempt for a brutal theocracy like the Islamic Republic of Iran as they do a country like Israel? And I'm sure you guys can figure that one out. The subject of Khatami, the guy who succeeded him as president, Ahmadinejad. Ahmadinejad. Are you talking about Khatami or Ahmadinejad? I know Ahmadinejad was an open Holocaust denier. I know I've read that in one of my many books on the topic of Iran, how he was a Holocaust denier. So I know Ahmadinejad was. The most visible symbol of the IRGC's strength is the Basij, whose members can be seen on street corners in every Iranian city. A less visible measure is its manipulation of the economy. When the clerics took hold after the revolution, they secured control of large sectors of the economy, including oil production, factories, and ports. During the next 2 decades, an array of state-owned enterprises were privatized, but rather than going to skilled business people, many of them were acquired by IRGC and its associates. So this is what I was alluding to earlier, that Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, it sounds like he's really entrenched himself in the economy using the IRGC. Today, elements of the Guard are thought to own construction companies, oil refineries, and mines, along with a 19-story luxury mall in a posh neighborhood of Tehran. No one is entirely sure of how much the economy the group controls. Credible estimates range from 10% to more than 50%. One indication of its wealth came in 2009 when its investment arm paid $7.8 billion for a majority stake in the telecommunication company of Iran. The IRGC's total budget on paper was only $5 billion. In Iranian society, the Guard has grown into an untouchable elite. They have their own schools, their own markets, their own neighborhoods, their own resorts, a former senior Middle Eastern intelligence officer told me. The neighborhoods look like a carbon copy of Beverly Hills. So I imagine that just straight up purges, executions, imprisonment of dissidents, journalists, intellectuals who are critical of the regime, especially when talking earlier about how Iranians get blackmailed into going to rallies that support the regime, or else they would get fired. It sounds like they do have that power over the economy. And maybe this is just another under-discussed part of Iranian cultures, the fact that people are intimidated into silence. And one measure of that is the state's quasi-control over the economy through the IRGC. Just owning large swaths of the economy, or construction companies and oil companies and mines. I imagine if they're not going to punish you by arresting you or breaking skulls or executing you, maybe they'll just kick you out. Maybe they'll just get you fired from your job. And if you want to find a new job, you might have to go to a business that they happen to own or control. And maybe we don't know as much about this because, again, a lot of critics are intimidated into silence. Since taking office, Trump has made a series of efforts to strangle the IRGC. In 2017, the Treasury Department designated the Guard as a terrorist organization, and Secretary Steve Mnuchin pledged to disrupt the IRGC's destructive activities. But sanctions imposed by the West had a perverse effect. Because few countries could trade with Iran, the businesses that the IRGC controlled came to exercise near monopolies within the country. As the U.S. and its allies policed international shipping, the IRGC tightened its controls on the sea lanes and the airports where oil smuggling and drug trafficking were flourishing. When Rouhani became president in 2013, he started working to restrain the IRGC's power. He moved to take away some of its business holdings, encouraging the idea that all soldiers must return to the barracks. He also led negotiations with the West over the country's nuclear program, which the Guard oversees. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard, which is an arm, it's the muscle of a brutal theocracy, is controlling the country's nuclear program.
Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs!
But I guess they can be trusted with the nuclear program. I do find it a little ironic that a lot of Democrats in America, going all the way back to the Obama years, seem to think that American citizens cannot be trusted to purchase and own firearms. We need more regulations. We need longer background checks or whatever. But then they seem to think that Islamic theocrats can be trusted with nuclear technology. Not only that, but we'll also lift economic sanctions and help the regime enrich itself. And hope, they might use that money to, finance terrorist groups. Or do other horrible things to Iranians. Or they might try to use that money to spread its bullshit-ass theocracy beyond its borders. But as long as they don't build a nuclear program, which they still might do, which we can totally trust them because it's in the control of the IRGC.
That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, dude.
But both initiatives ultimately floundered, and the IRGC pushed back with a campaign of its own. In 2017, prosecutors, many of them loyal to the Guard, began a series of criminal investigations of people close to Rouhani, imprisoning his brother on corruption charges. So even when the people successfully managed to vote in anyone who is willing to do a little bit of reform, sounds like the military arm of the Ayatollah has a means of pushing back, intimidating the politicians into silence. Tensions became acute that officials publicly discussed efforts to neutralize Rouhani. In a speech in August 2018, Khamenei complained of usurpers who were working on the enemy's plan. 2 months later, Ayatollah Zarghami, a former IRGC general and head of Iranian state broadcasting, said in an interview that the chiefs of several leading state enterprises had been preparing to take over in many of those areas and manage them instead of the government. The effort was thwarted, but there may have been another. Masoud Bastani, an Iranian journalist whose reporting has landed him in prison 3 times, told me that late last year the IRGC was moving to strip Rouhani of much of his power. A source who is familiar with the inner workings of the Guard told me that officers were planning to arrest roughly 100 people close to the president. But before anything could happen, Rouhani's administration threw the country into chaos. On November 15th, the government announced that it was raising the price of gasoline by 50%. Isn't that amazing? Living in a country where the government can just decide to jack up oil prices by 50%? The news was released quietly in the middle of the night on a national holiday, but it was still met with outrage. Iranians drive everywhere and rely on government-subsidized gasoline. Ordinary citizens began swarming into the streets to protest, touching off the largest and most disruptive riots since the revolution. And again, guys, this was in November of 2019. On the second day of the protest, Puya Bakhtiari, a 27-year-old electrical engineer, was driving home from work in the Tehran suburb of Karaj when he passed a crowd gathering to demonstrate. Social media had been pulsing all day with talk of the protest. At home, he shared a lunch of okra stew with his mother, Nahid. Afterward, he told her that he was heading into the streets and asked if she wanted to come along. She agreed on one condition: only if you hold my hand. Puya's sister, Mona, decided to join him too. The Bakhtiaris were sick of the revolution, even though Puya's father had fought in the Revolutionary Guard for 5 years during the Iran-Iraq War. Puya, who was hoping to marry soon and build a life, loathed it the most. Puya loved poetry and nature. He saw beauty in everything. Now, he told me he loved history, and he used to say these clerics have ruined our country.
You're goddamn right.
He used to say we have never had such a terrible time ever in our history. The protest quickly became an outlet for broader frustrations. We can see that the government is spending our money on other countries, sending it to Hamas, to Syria, and Hezbollah. Now, he said the protests were not about gasoline. They were about protesting the same bunch of people in charge for 40 years, deliberately seeking a fight with the United States. It is these people who have turned Iran into a pariah state. We cannot have any fun. Iran is a joyless religious dictatorship. We are forced into fake identities. As the family joined the demonstration, Nahid experienced a rush of euphoria. The crowd was angry, but not violent. America is not the enemy, the marchers roared. The enemy is here.
You're goddamn right.
The police fired tear gas, but the marchers kept surging forward. Nahid felt suddenly free. I turned to Moda and said, "This is the best night of my life." Puya told his mother that he had torn his shoe and was heading back to the car, and then he disappeared into the crowd. Nahid heard the sound of gunfire, sporadic at first and then sustained. She pushed through the throng, seeing people fall around her, bleeding from gunshot wounds. How horrible it will be for the mothers of these sons, she told herself. Then she spotted Puya in the arms of a group of protesters. He had been shot in the head. That's my son, she screamed. Nahid and Mona pulled Puya into the car and raced him to a hospital. He was dead before they arrived. Now, did the police who shot these did they mean no harm? Were they just defending the regime? The following days brought no relief to the family. I was crazy with grief, Nahid said. At first, the security forces refused to turn over Puya's body. Then they dragged Nahid and her husband to the police station for questioning. Plainclothes officers lingered outside the family's home. Men called on the phone and threatened them, she said. When we asked who killed Puya, the agent said it must be the MEK, the opposition group. When they finally received Puya's body, 2,000 sympathizers turned out for a ceremony to mourn his death. Policemen lurked in the periphery. In the months after her son's death, Nahid began to visit the mothers of other slain Iranians. The crackdown showed us that the regime will do whatever it takes to hold on to power, she said. Yeah, they'll do whatever it takes, but if they attack Israel, then they don't really mean any harm, right? It was just it was just a show of force, like the Islamic Republic, like the regime in Iran has never cracked down on opposition before. The November demonstrations were remarkably distinct from those in 2009. The earlier protests were led by the middle class and by university students and took place largely in major cities. The more recent demonstrations were begun by workers, the regime's traditional base, and spread rapidly throughout the country. They also turned violent. In many cities, demonstrators burned stores and trashed police stations. The 2009 protests showed that the regime had lost the middle class, a shop owner who witnessed the protests in his Tehran suburb told me. The protests in November show that they have lost the working class too. The regime struck back brutally. It happened very fast, a Western diplomat in Tehran told me. The government switched off the phones and the internet and responded massively, and the whole thing was over in 3 days. I think the regime was genuinely afraid. Iranian authorities confirmed that some 7,000 people had been arrested, and they have not disclosed the number of civilians killed. Civilians killed. When's the last time I've heard any of these supposed anti-Zionist, anti-Israel asshats who love to talk about civilian casualties and collateral damage whenever Israel has to defend itself, whenever Israel has to strike back against Iranian-supported terrorist groups, genocidal maniacs like Hamas. They'll get really loud about civilian death. I don't remember anyone from the Young Turks. I don't remember anyone talking about these protests in Iran and how hundreds, if not thousands, were killed, depending on which source you want to read. I know this piece on Reuters from December 2019. Iranians later ordered crackdown on unrest, do whatever it takes to end. I think this piece claims that it could be over 1,000. About 1,500 people were killed during less than 2 weeks of the unrest on November 15th. The toll was provided to Reuters by 3 Iranian Interior Ministry officials, including at least 17 teenagers and about 400 women, as well as some members of the security forces and police. So it sounds like officials within the Iranian Interior Ministry. And then we have sources like Amnesty International, which I take with a huge grain of salt now. Here, yeah, Amnesty International claims it's about 300, although they have shady reporting at times. Amnesty International. Again, I'm just saying, I don't remember. I don't remember hearing about these protests much at all, and I'm sure it definitely looks like many media outlets covered it, but in the commentary world, in the political punditry world, this is another long report too. I don't remember many people getting worked up about a brutal theocracy killing protesters, shutting down the internet on top of that. Yeah, they turned off the phones and the internet. and then killed hundreds, if not over 1,000 people in Iran. In a nearly unprecedented sign of unrest, the demonstrators began to fight back. According to Iranian news accounts, at least 6 police officers and soldiers were killed, apparently by protesters. 4 of them were shot to death, even though civilians are largely forbidden to have guns. Others were stabbed. Security forces encountered resistance in such areas as Kurdistan and Khuzestan, which border neighboring countries. A YouTube video purportedly taken in Khuzestan shows security forces shooting civilians as they flee into a marsh. That suggests that there's some kind of organized resistance. Ali Alfane, a senior fellow at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington, said, "Ordinary civilians do not hide in a marsh." A few politicians tried to raise an outcry. Parvena Salshori, a member of the parliament, made a speech from the floor of the legislature in which she denounced the military's influence on the government's decisions. "How can I, as a representative of the people, watch the murder of my country's young?" she said. She told me that she was accosted and harassed for days afterward. Khamenei attempted to shift the blame, maintaining that the decision to use force had not been his, but he showed no pity toward those killed, saying that the security forces had fired on hooligans and dupes of foreign agents. "Such actions are not carried out by ordinary people," he said of the protests. "They are thugs." Talk about calling the pot, calling the alleged kettle black. Khamenei warned that he would not stand in the way of the security forces in the future. President Rouhani did not appear in public for several days during my visit, though. He had held a press conference, and I asked him how many civilians the government had killed. He gave a rambling response before concluding, "You're going to have to ask the medical examiner's office." Iranian reporters later reached out to the medical examiner in Tehran. The office demurred, saying the Ministry of Interior is responsible for announcing these statistics. When I returned to my seat, an Iranian reporter, her face surrounded by a chador, turned to me and spoke loudly enough for much of the room to hear. "I noticed the president did not answer your question," she said in flawless English. "We hate him." Away from direct confrontation with the Islamic Republic, Iranians carry on a parallel existence. It is a crime for women to leave the house without a hijab, but in the well-off sections of northern Tehran, it is not uncommon to spot women walking down the street with their hair defiantly exposed. So many areas of private life fall under the state's purview that flouting the laws is hard to avoid. In 2014, 6 Iranian men and women recorded themselves dancing to Pharrell Williams' song Happy and posted the video on YouTube with the title Happy We Are From Tehran. The authorities arrested them for violating laws that prohibit dancing with the opposite sex. They were sentenced to a year in prison and 91 lashes apiece for dancing. For dancing with the opposite sex. They were sentenced to a year in prison and 91 lashes apiece in 2014. At times during my visit, Tehran reminded me of Eastern Europe in the 80s when ordinary people, constrained by a sclerotic communist system, coped by living as if the state did not exist. One night I attended a dinner party in a middle-class neighborhood of Tehran. Iranian music drifted from the stereo. Women wore skirts and leather boots, their hair uncovered. Bottles of Moroccan wine, homemade but delicious, were arrayed on a table. One of the men told me that illicit parties were so common that he had been making a living as a DJ. Almost every party received a visit from a police officer who said, usually with a wink, that the music was too loud. "I gave him some money and he goes away," the man told me. Another man complained about the daily struggle of making his business work in an unpredictable and corrupt system with chronic shortages of material and unruly inspectors pushing for bribes. "Plan for the next quarter," he said. "I cannot even plan for tomorrow morning." And I recall reading that shortly after the revolution. So what sparked the revolution in Iran was economic hardship in Iran largely a result of the Shah's economic policies, his government economic planning, and all of that fun stuff. And one of the catalysts for the revolution was economic hardship, because the Shah enjoyed support mostly from the middle class and working class, whose lives were not terrible enough to really make a fuss about. And then after the Islamic Republic, after the clerics and the theocrats took over, I think Ruhollah Khomeini is quoted as saying something along the lines of, well, the people didn't take to the streets for cheaper melons. Kind of brushing off, the whole notion of economic concerns. Like, oh yeah, who does anybody really need cheaper melons? And now it's an economic system that sounds like a lot of the spoils have went to thugs and IRGC guards who take on the spoils in exchange for maintaining the regime's power. In Iran, some of the most intense unrest comes from frustration with the regime's intrusions into private life. One evening, I met a young woman who went by Sarah, who was involved in a recent protest movement to open soccer games to women. The protest gained prominence in 2018 when 35 women, many of Sarah's friends, gathered outside a match between two Tehran soccer clubs and demanded to be allowed in. They were attempting to do openly what other young women had been doing in secret by flattening their breasts, painting on mustaches, dressing up in boys' clothes, and sneaking inside. All 35 were arrested. It's a crime for a woman to go to a fucking soccer match in Iran. The Iranian regime has repressed the women's movement with particular ferocity. In 2017, a woman named Vida Movahed climbed onto a utility box in downtown Tehran, removed her hijab, and waved it around on a stick. More women followed and became known as the Girls of Revolution Street. The authorities arrested not only them and Movahed, but also her lawyer, Nasrin Sotoudeh, who was sentenced to 38 years in prison and 148 lashes. Even if you're a lawyer trying to represent women in court, you're going to get a harsh punishment. Sarah was nervous about meeting me in public. It really is dangerous, she said. Me sitting here talking to you might get me in deep trouble. Still, she was poised and determined, insisting that she be granted her rights. People like, now that I'm thinking about it, do we remember that guy a few months ago? That, what was he, an Air Force vet who lit himself on fire in Washington, D.C. to bring awareness to the Palestinian conflict, to what was going on in Israel. And he's been hailed as this big hero for sacrificing himself, for bringing more attention to the cause. That's who they'll glorify. I have not seen anyone hold up this lady or Vida Movahed as heroes. These are real heroes. Women fighting for their rights in a brutal theocracy and risking it all to just get information. And, not to go back to The Handmaid's Tale, but that's something that does happen in The Handmaid's Tale. A bunch of handmaids secretly write letters, which alone is a crime in that show. Women are not allowed to read or write unless they're doing like accounting for the handmaids. I think the aunts are allowed to write and read and stuff. But there's one point where they managed to organize and collect a bunch of postcards and letters of the handmaids writing about their former life and how horrible life is in Gilead. And they got to sneak it out into Canada so all of the letters and writings can be reported in the press outside of Gilead. And it's portrayed as this ballsy, heroic thing. Women speaking up and talking about how horrible things are in Gilead. Shit like that happens every day in Iran. And this is the sort of rhetoric we get from the Cenk Uygurs of the world and the other left-wing loons, goons, and buffoons of the world. Iran is just defending itself. What else can they do? Well, I'm not saying I like the Islamic Republic. They're horrible, but Maybe there is like a segment. Maybe I'm not being fair. Maybe Cenk Uygur back in like December of 2019 briefly talked about this. That's a fun experiment, by the way. Take any one of these accounts that's, suddenly interested in defending the Islamic Republic's right to, quote-unquote, defend itself. We obviously know that Iran will be painted as the aggressor in every article. Rightfully so. They are aggressors. What more proof do you need? Or is this just, the mainstream media manufacturing consent? These Noam Chomsky reading losers. And the reason why I bring up people like Salman Rushdie and Massad Ahmadinejad is because a lot of people have this attitude of like, yeah, Iran's horrible, the Islamic Republic is horrible, but it's not like they're trying to kill me. They're on the other side of the world. If we just left them alone, they would leave Americans alone or whatever. They're not a threat to me. Meanwhile, people like Salman Rushdie and Massad Ahmadinejad do get threats, do get legitimate harm done to them by people on U.S. soil. Oh, wow. I bring up the Handmaid's Tale. This brings up the Handmaid's Tale. Wow. Why did I not read ahead? If you want to know how we live, you might have to watch The Handmaid's Tale, she said. This is the real Gilead. Margaret Atwood, she wrote our story before we were born. And again, Margaret Atwood, based on what I've read, she took inspiration from the Islamic Revolution and the Islamic Republic as inspiration for the bad guys in The Handmaid's Tale. And 40 years later, we have people in the U.S. Defending Iran's right to exist, I guess, defend itself. Oh, they might, the media might paint Iran as the they've been aggressing for 4 decades. As far as I can tell. Last year, a 29-year-old woman named Sahar Kodayari was arrested while trying to sneak into a soccer match and charged with appearing in public without a hijab. She set herself on fire and died. Afterward, the authorities finally conceded a little. Under pressure from FIFA, the International Soccer Authority, the Iranian government agreed to allow women to attend matches of the national team as long as it was playing foreign opponents. Sarah described the thrill of entering Tehran Stadium for a match between the Iranian and Cambodian teams. The soccer field is really green when you see it, she told me, even though the women were relegated to a roped-off area behind a goal. Everyone was screaming and crying, she said. It was a dream. Something as little as just going to a soccer match is a big deal for the women in Iran. I asked Sarah why the authorities were concerned about something as trivial as a soccer match. They know that if they open the doors to the stadium, they should open other doors too, she said. But the women of this country are not going to stop. I am absolutely prepared to go to prison. All her friends felt the same way about the authorities, she said. The problem they have with us is that if women get power, they're going to take them down. That is the fact. They are going to overthrow the government. Yeah, and again, I not to harp on this, and I know I keep going to the same 2 examples, but people seem to have this idea. People seem more interested in Iran's, the Islamic Republic's quote-unquote right to defend itself from Israeli aggression. I don't really see these same people defending the rights of women in Iran, fighting against the Islamic Republic's aggression against Iranians. On April 9th, Khamenei appeared on the Iran's Channel 1 to talk about the coronavirus. Since the outbreak began, Iran has been devastated by the virus with 114,000 confirmed cases, nearly 7,000 dead, and no reasonable prospect of containment. Instead of acknowledging the government's failures, Khamenei declared a triumph. The Iranian nation had a brilliant performance in this test, he said. The people's cooperation has also created beautiful, fascinating, and astonishing scenes, and they can be seen everywhere. Iran's example shown in contrast to that of the West, he said, where crazed residents had empty storage shelves, committed suicide, and fought with one another over toilet paper. He added, the Wild West has been revived. That is what they say. What was it, 7,000 people dead? 114,000 cases. So 7 divided by 114. That's a 6%. Wow, I was off. So, okay, 114,000. 6% death rate from the coronavirus in Iran. And it was held up as a triumph, held up as a success. From the start of his time in government, Khamenei has proclaimed his loathing of the United States. In 1987, he told the United Nations, "The history of our nation is a black, bitter, and bloody chapter mixed with the varieties of hostility and spite from the American regime." He seems to take pleasure in recounting America's sins. During one meeting with government officials, he gave a disclosure on Uncle Tom's Cabin as a depiction of the realities of America and the American government. The sense of enmity goes both ways. Ever since the revolution, the United States has pressed the Iranian regime over its sponsorship of terror and its nuclear program, but Khamenei has used the confrontation to justify crushing domestic opponents and to explain away economic mismanagement. Yeah, it's just economic mismanagement. Oops. Rising tensions with the United States has nearly always coincided with crackdowns on dissidents and intellectuals, with the exclusion of reformers from ballots. In 2010, Mohammad Khatami told Karim Sadeghipour, an Iran expert at the Carnegie Endowment, that the Supreme Leader had once confided, "We need the United States as an enemy." I've heard the same thing about Putin in Russia, that Putin, he plays up international tensions and foreign relations as an excuse to do horrible things in Russia. I think Tim Snyder is pretty big on that claim. The Iranians' ultimate gamesmanship has involved the nuclear accord. For years, Khamenei opposed direct talks with the United States, but periodically made concessions, even occasionally agreeing to halt the program altogether. All the while, he led his country closer to a usable weapon.
Spaghettios!
Finally, in 2013, with the country crippled by sanctions, he began signaling that he was open to talks, calling on Iranians to demonstrate heroic flexibility. The country's leadership hoped that a deal would produce a surge in the economy. That prospect collapsed when Trump canceled the deal and imposed even harsher sanctions. And to his credit, you guys know I do not like Donald Trump. On this issue, on the issue of foreign relations with Iran, he's probably been better than both Obama and Biden, if I'm being honest. Several Iran experts in the United States told me that they believe the regime might resume negotiations after the presidential elections this fall, 2020. Their reasons for optimism varied. Some argued that if Trump lost, the nuclear deal could be revived. Others said that if Trump won, Khamenei would have no choice but to negotiate. Iranian officials rejected both scenarios, telling me that the Supreme Leader would never again make a deal. The United States cannot be counted on to keep its word, Mohammad Marandi, a professor at Tehran University, told me, as if brutal theocratic dictators can be trusted to make a deal. Over time, there have been hints that the regime is maintaining covert capabilities. The most recent one surfaced in 2018 after Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, carried out a brazen plot to steal nuclear secrets from a secure warehouse in Tehran. Arriving in a semi-truck before midnight, a team of agents broke into the facility and, using high-intensity torches, cut open safes. For 6 hours, they carted off documents and CDs. CDs? That's the storage document technology they're using in Iran, is compact discs? What is this, 1999? Have they heard of thumb drives or whatever? Or even DVDs? DVDs hold more storage than... What is this shit? Leaving just before an armed guard was due to begin his morning shift. According to a former senior U.S. intelligence official, the Iranian military launched an enormous dragnet operation, but the Israelis escaped across the border into Azerbaijan. Another former intelligence official told me that several members of Iran's security forces were arrested afterward. There was a big purge, he said. What's fascinating, has there been any movies made about this? That would make for a good movie or like TV show, wouldn't it? This is like some James Bond, Mission Impossible type shit. The Mossad, Israeli intelligence, they sent agents into Tehran, a brutal theocratic dictatorship, and managed to break into one of their facilities and steal a bunch of their documents, and they made it out safely. Who wouldn't want to watch that movie? When reports of the raid emerged, Iranian officials said that the whole thing was a hoax and that the documents were phony. The Israelis maintained that the archive, as they call it, was a history of Iran's nuclear weapons program until 2003, when the regime claimed to have largely suspended it. According to a Western expert, the documents detail the existence of two nuclear sites that have been hidden from inspectors. Oh, really? So Iran is just hiding nuclear sites from inspectors, yet we can trust this regime to honor a nuclear agreement where the U.S. lifts sanctions so that the regime can have access to more money, more unfrozen assets. All the while they hide nuclear sites from inspectors. One had produced uranium hexafluoride, a material used in the enrichment process, and the other was a facility for testing weapons components. Western officials could not determine whether the sites were active, but when international inspectors alerted by the Israelis asked to visit them, the Iranians refused, what a surprise, and razed the testing facility. There was a rush to clean up the site, the expert told me. Yeah, and I know a lot of times when this gets brought up, a lot of people like to claim that the nuclear deal under the Obama administration was a success, and that, Trump ripping up the deal made tensions even worse with Iran. Doesn't sound like it. Doesn't sound like this is a regime that can be trusted with technology when they're hiding sites from inspectors, and then when asked to take a look, they burn it to the ground and raise it and hide things. And again, this takes ballsy efforts from the Israeli intelligence agency. It really takes massive balls of steel.
Blow it out your ass.
I've got balls of steel.
Takes massive balls of steel.
I've got balls of steel.
To uncover some of this information. That was in 2018. So in 2018, after the agreement was ripped up by then President Donald Trump, Israeli intelligence agents went into Iran, stole a bunch of their secrets, and found out a bunch of stuff, like the fact that maybe this is not a regime that can be trusted to honor their ends of deals, especially when it comes to important shit like developing nuclear weapons, which, again, no big deal because they only have a long history of funding terrorist groups and using proxies to carry out attacks against Americans and against Israel. Last spring, Iran announced that it was abandoning the constraints imposed by the nuclear agreement and stepped up its enrichment of uranium. A Western I guess the logical thing to do is beg the Ayatollah to come back to a figurative table to talk about a new deal. And maybe if we unfreeze a few more assets, give Iran a few billion, few tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of material assets, material wealth. After, years and years of oppressing its own people and waging war beyond its borders. Totally be trusted with money and nuclear technology. Last spring, Iran announced that it was abandoning the constraints imposed by the agreement. A Western official who tracks the program told me that at the current rate, the Iranians could have enough enriched material for a bomb in less than 7 months. David Albright, the president of the Institute for Science and International Security, estimates that it could take half that long. Constructing a sophisticated weapon with the enriched uranium would likely require 12 to 18 months more. A crude device could be ready to test much sooner, though, perhaps in the Iranian desert. Such a device probably could not be launched at an enemy and would likely use much of the enriched uranium that Iran has. But the Western official said the world would suddenly look quite different. And I think he's not wrong there. So yeah, I guess that's the good news. If they were to develop a bomb, it'd be hard for them to detonate. I've heard people speculate before, like, yeah, they might not be able to launch it at a country like Israel, or maybe some U.S. military bases in, say, Qatar or Iraq or whatever. They might not be able to successfully launch it on, say, like an ICBM, but maybe they could give it to Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis. I don't know how they would deliver it, but people have gotten a little imaginative with that. Like, oh, they would just give it to some suicide bombers. Or a suicide bomber who would then manage to smuggle it somewhere to detonate. Then again, I don't even know how possible that is, because I'm pretty sure these bombs are not easy to move around. 9,000 pounds. Okay. That's according to the United States Navy. At least Little Boy was that much. Thus far, Iranian leaders apparently have not begun working to weaponize a nuclear device, yet the uncertainty has refocused Western intelligence analysts on preparing the question, will Khamenei decide to build a weapon? Most analysts I spoke to believe that he will not, unless the regime faces an existential threat from outside the country. But if he dies, the day he's gone, then I think all options are on the table, the Western official said. On January 6th, 2020, Khamenei stood in front of a huge crowd at Tehran University and wept. He was there for the funeral of Qasem Soleimani, the head of the elite Quds force who had, through military pressure, political maneuvering, and ruthless terror attacks, made Iran the most influential country in the Middle East. He had been killed 3 days before on Trump's orders when an MQ-9 Reaper drone struck the convoy near the Baghdad airport. Yeah. Good riddance, I say. Footage shared with me by an Iraqi official showed one of Soleimani's hands, charred and torn from his body, with a distinctive ruby signet ring still intact, enough to prove his identity. Soleimani's killing provoked an outpouring of national mourning, with millions of Iranians coming to see his body as his funerary procession traveled the country. In Tehran, the line of mourners stretched more than 3 miles. During the funeral, Khamenei lamented, "God, the wrapped bodies that are in front of our feet are your worshippers and the children of your worshippers." He seemed to be bidding goodbye not just to a national hero, but to someone whose popularity he could never hope to match. Soleimani was a principal architect of Iran's foreign policy, but he also believed to have been deeply involved in domestic decisions, including the suppression of the rebellions in 1999 and 2009. Just dawned on me that it seems to happen every 10 years, 1999, 2009, 2019. Then I guess you could say again in 2022. He was the supreme leader's closest counselor. Khamenei saw him like a son, Morandi, the professor at Tehran University who knew Soleimani, said, and was the only Revolutionary Guard general who never rotated out of his job. And a senior Iraqi official recalled once asking Soleimani why he did not run for president. Soleimani thought for a moment and said, "Why would I do that?" The official explained his logic. Soleimani had all the power and no accountability. Sounds like Soleimani has a lot more power, or had a lot more power than the elected president in Iran. Soleimani was expected to help. See, in places like America and Israel, there are sophisticated, strong checks and balances of power within their respective governments. Here in America, we have a judicial system that checks power, including the executive branch of the federal government. You have Congress, you have the courts. But in countries like Iran, you have a dictatorship, a supreme leader who can just override anything. Seemingly, you have a supreme leader and a military general who can just override the checks and balances. The citizens of Iran have no ability to address grievances. Whenever they protest, they get brutally suppressed. Whenever they use the media to voice opposition to the regime, they get brutally suppressed and intimidated into silence. If they don't show up to rallies that cheer on the regime, they can get fired because the IRGC is very entrenched in the economy.